everyone, it's Tanny Games here. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video we are going to be going over the camera mode. So the camera mode has had a little bit of an upgrade this update. It did also have one a while ago, and in the Alice update, and I didn't do a video then. As you all know, I was a bit late and it kind of threw me through a bit of a loop through my usual, I guess, update video process. So I never actually did one. So we're going to do one today, going over the changes. Now, there was one change that I wanted to showcase you straight away, using the chair that Belle has decided to steal from me. Yeah, the audacity. The audacity. Okay, let's place another chair down and I'll show you with this one instead. If you try and steal this chair, girl, you are in trouble. Okay, we're gonna sit down in the chair. So I guess the most obvious question was, we knew we were getting seated posing with this update. They did showcase it in the developer update video. Now, in the developer update video, it was kind of shown a bit awkwardly because they showed the avatar going to the bench and sitting down. You can't technically do that whilst you're in photo mode. You have to sit down and then you go into photo mode. So you see I've got my camera already with me. So if I just right click, which is the button I need to press to get into photo mode, whatever it is for you on your controller to enter photo mode, that is the button you need to press. And now you can get a lovely seated image in photo mode, essentially. Now, I will say there are some downsides to this. There are no poses in photo mode. I kind of wish they'd have considered adding in unique posing for the photo mode. I think that would have been just kind of like really helpful and stuff like that if they'd have done that, because at the moment you just have whatever the pose is the character makes when they're seated. There are a couple of different seated options depending on the type of chair you use. Some of them say sit, some of them say lounge, and they will all have kind of different, slightly different positions. So this one, her hands are on her lap, whereas I believe if you're lounging, she tends to scroll through the phone. There is the Aladdin pillow, which you lay back on, and she has her camera out with that. That's another pose that you get. So some of the seats will have slightly different poses in that regard, but otherwise there aren't any kind of unique posing, which I think is a shame. Now, the next big thing I want to talk about is this button here, because this was the other thing that was shown in the developer update. And this basically is a randomize filter, or toggle, I guess you could say. So this will randomly change sort of what facial expression you have. Presumably if you're stood up, you will change your standing pose, but because we're seated, there isn't really a change with that. It will then also adjust things like aperture, focus, contrast, everything like that. It can add on different times of days, it can add on filters, it can add on frames as well. So this is just like a randomize button. So this might be fun to play around with if you're kind of like, oh, I don't really know what kind of vibe to go for, what to do. And then you go, oh, do you know what? I'll just have a play with this. And then you're like, oh, this is kind of cool, but you know what? This filter doesn't go with it. So you can like, well, actually, no, you can't. There you go. Yes, you can. I forgot how the filters work. You have to click the none button. There you go. So you could remove that and go, yeah, this is kind of more what I want. I want it to look like everything's on fire. That's the vibe I want. And then you can go for that. And then you could go, do you know what though? I want it to be more like a nighttime shot. So then you skip the time of day ahead and then you go, I don't want her to look happy. I want her to look angry and menacing. And then you alter that and then you snap and there's your photo. So There is kind of a usefulness to the randomized toggle if you want to get a bit more creative with your photography and try some different and unique concepts. It can be good for that. However, I don't think this is going to be what we need for dream snaps, because truthfully, some of these are just terrible. For lack of a better word, they're terrible. So I don't highly recommend using this, but if you just want to be a bit more playful with photography and sort of see how some of the effects are that you can do in game, then I do think this is something that you can play with should you want to. Now the next big upgrades come here in this menu. So naturally we have the time of day toggle, which we had in the Alice update, and this lets you fast forward through time basically. So you can change it so that you've got like a sunrise or a noon shot, or even a sunset into nighttime kind of shot. So this is great because it means you don't have to go in and out the menus to check your lighting, which I think is really good. So yeah, I absolutely love this. I think this is such a fantastic addition and really, really nice. Now, whilst we're sort of on this current time of day and you can see the background here behind us is blurry, we have this thing called aperture. Now, aperture is meant to be about sort of how much light and the field of view of a camera. So it controls basically the amount of light that passes through to the camera sensor and stuff like that. So yeah, this is what it does. It basically, as you can see here, the background went into focus. So if you wanted to create a bit more of a slightly focused background, but you didn't want to have to use this filter in order to achieve that because you don't like how that adjusts the colors, then you can use the aperture and just bump it up slightly and boom, it's all in focus for you. So I do love that, and then it does go, when you get to the end, it gets blurry again. Now I think there might be something wrong with this kind of toggle because it does seem to be focused and blurred at 100. There is kind of like no steady, kind of gradual in between, which I find a bit weird. But yeah, if you are wanting to get a little bit more focus in your background, the aperture is a great item to use. We then have the focus toggle, which again, that kind of adds a blur. And again, I think this is another one where I feel like the toggle doesn't quite work. It seems to be nothing and everything in terms of a blurred focus rather than a gradual, which I think is a bit of a shame. It does seem like it doesn't kind of work properly for some reason, which I do think is a bit oh wait, no, there, look. Do you guys see that on the top of my skirt? It was getting blurry there. Maybe it's because I adjusted the aperture there. That's probably why. But yeah, you see this one, it makes my background blurry. But then so does the top of my skirt. It's just a bit weird. It's like it doesn't work 100% properly. Because like, look at my legs. Look how weird that looks. Tell me that, I just think it's a bit, the control, it doesn't seem to work as it should do. That's my worry, is that it doesn't work 100% as it should. But yeah, the focus, again, that should be to do with what's in focus, what gets blurred and things like that, which I do like. It's nice to have that kind of toggle, but as you can see, it's not 100% there. It's weird. It is weird. I don't know what to make of it. It's a bit weird. It's like it doesn't 100% work, but they have just implemented these, so perhaps they might get tweaked a bit over time and we might see some improvements to their function. Now, next I want to talk about the contrast. Now, that is basically the difference between the lightest and the darkest points of a shot. So if you up the contrast, the darker shades get darker and the brighter shades get brighter quite significantly. Now, again, this was a nice way of sharpening up a shot, perhaps adding a little bit of brightness to a shot. But I would never go too far with the contrast because you get this what is the word? I've completely forgotten the word for it. And I know I knew what the word was because I used it in my Nikki video. But basically you don't want this over bright kind of look, because it looks too harsh. It can look too harsh. So my recommendation is never go up to 100, but you can definitely increase it to add a bit of vibrancy to a shot, add a bit of lightness and brightness, and really create those deeper, darker shadows as well. So the contrast is a lovely tool. Now saturation, when you increase the saturation, you add a lot more brightness and warmth to certain tones. So you can see here her face has gone a bit more red. The yellow is a bit more deeper, more orange, more golden. The greens in the background are quite bright as well. Whereas if we turn the saturation down, it basically drains the image of its color. You're kind of taking the color out of the shot. That is what happens with the saturation. So we've kind of got this dull tone here at this level, and then slowly as we go up, that color comes back in. This is the normal color, and then you'll see here how much sharper and brighter those colors get as we turn it up. So that's basically what the saturation does. Then we have brightness, which again just turns up the overall brightness of a shot. Now turning up the overall brightness of a shot brightens all areas. It doesn't just brighten like the highlights, it brightens everything. So overall everything gets lighter. Whereas for instance on like contrast, it's mainly the brighter points get bright and the darker points get dark. So that's kind of the difference between those. Vignette, I love a vignette. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Vignette basically just adds this dark circle around the edging. I do think this is quite a harsh vignette. There's a really clear and defined line. So I would never go too far, just kind of lightly on the edges a bit, so it does feel a bit more gradual. But yeah, it just adds kind of like a darker border, a darker edge. But I do think if you go too high on the vignette, it can just look a bit artificial and kind of fake, if that makes sense. But you'll see here we have this kind of almost like bright circle in the middle, and then the darker outlines surrounding. So there might be fun ways of kind of dealing with this if you change some of the colors and kind of treat it more as a spotlight. But for me, when I add vignettes into my images, I just use it a little bit on the edges because it just has that slight border. It doesn't feel too artificial or harsh of a line. It just kind of blends seamlessly like an ombre type effect, which is what I like. Now we can talk about highlights and shadows, and this kind of goes a bit hand in hand with contrast. So contrast, as I said, will make the lightest points brighter and the dark points darker, whereas something like highlights will just kind of make those overall brighter points brighter and stuff. There isn't a deepening of the darker spots, and here you can see the image gets dark. It does go into pitch black, which I'm not sure why it does that. But yeah, you'll see there's like an overall highlight, an overall lightness to the shot. And again, with shadows, it's kind of like making everything darker. So you can see here, we still see those bright areas like the moon and the dress, but everything else gets really, really dark until eventually it's in nothingness, and this is pure white. I don't think the highlights and shadows on this work as well as they do on the Infinity Nikki camera. I think that's one of the problems, is that it feels like these adjustments aren't quite accurate. Like when I alter the shadows, the fact that this goes pure white so quickly, it's just odd. Like I said, it's kind of like an all or nothing. There isn't that gradualness, which I think a lot of these filters should have. But it might be quite good for creating some of these deeper, darker contrasting bits, creating that kind of higher contrast style image to make certain areas of a submission or an image pop out compared to some of those darker, mysterious kind of areas and things. Now next is something that I think is really good as an addition, and it's character lighting. Now again, this is one of those things where it can go quite harsh if you turn this up too high, so you do have to be really careful. However, if you've got, for instance, a shot like this where it's currently nighttime and your character looks a bit shadowed, she looks a bit dull, it's not very vibrant, using the character lighting almost puts a spotlight on your character, so then she is a bit more brighter and vibrant. So if you've got a character that feels like they're especially shadowed, that they don't have a lot of lightness on them, that you just want to brighten up your character but not overwhelm the rest of the submission, not add too much light to the rest of the submission, the character lighting tool is perfect for that. As I said with the other tools, it's one of those things that it kind of goes from 0 to 100. There's like that lack of in between. It's not too bad, but literally as soon as you get to the 50% point, she just starts losing a lot of like warmth to her. But I guess there are ways you could improve that, you know, perhaps with even doing the saturation doesn't change the white cast on her like face, which isn't great. It isn't great, I'll admit that. It's not, it's quite harsh. Again, as I said, it's just a little bit harsh, which I don't like. Now let's talk about the light bloom. For that, I'm gonna bring in the Faithful Moon, because I feel like it's the best way to showcase the light bloom. If we keep a focus on the moon and the dress and I turn up this light bloom, you'll see how it creates this kind of foggy, kind of hazy glow. It basically makes the light points brighter, but then also casting this haze, this glow that kind of comes off. So if we think about one of the tricks that is sometimes utilized in dream snaps, where people put lights in the background and then it creates a kind of hazy glow, that is exactly what this light bloom effectively does, is it uses those light sources and creates a hazy bloom and glow. So that's what the light bloom does. Again, it's one of those things you can kind of go too much for it. I do think there are ways this could look good. Like this looks quite nice in terms of the sky. It really looks like there's a moon there, like a full moon. But obviously the skirt is a bit much. The skirt is a bit much. And then you've got here, you can see the half moon if you don't have the light bloom on. So it just depends the kind of look and aesthetic you want to go for. But if you did want to create that kind of hazy background glow, you can do that. You can see in the corner here, the lights in that corner, see how much more focused they are, and then you turn this up and they just give off a hazy glow. So if you've ever wanted that hazy glow kind of behind your character or something, the light bloom is such a good option for that. In fact, why don't I place a little bit of lighting behind my character now, just so you can sort of see how that works. If I grab one of these, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my character's outfit. We're going to just put on a different dress that doesn't quite glow, let's just say. So let's do this. Let's come back into camera mode. Thank you, whoever that was that subscribed. And then we're going to come down to light bloom again. And you see I do this and it creates that kind of glow behind my character here. You see how it does that? It creates that light source. That is effectively what the light bloom does. Now it is quite harsh here. It is quite harsh. But it is, again, it's just that creating that light bloom, that glow. That glow that cuts through. That's what that does. Let's move on to rotation. The next thing is basically the last thing in this, and this effectively does rotate your camera. So if you wanted to do some weird and wacky images, you can certainly do this. Now, I was hoping we could get a zoom feature. I'm hoping perhaps maybe that might be something they add eventually, because one of the things I like to do in Nikki is take portrait style shots, and using the rotation feature was how we used to have to do that before they added a portrait mode. And I would love that for this game, but just sadly, there isn't kind of like a zoom feature to get that close up on your character. But I think if we had a zoom feature, it would make taking like portrait photos so good and so worthwhile. Now, the only thing I would say is I do not recommend this for dream snaps. It is already sometimes difficult enough to see what's going on in a dream snap if you're on a smaller screen like on Switch. If you're on your phone, it's probably quite difficult as well, or if you play on like a tablet device or anything like a Steam Deck or something like that. So I think don't take the risk for dream snaps to do these weird angles where people are going to have to be cranking their neck just to see what's going on. I don't recommend it unless the rest of the shot corresponds with that. You know, you could probably alter the shot slightly, maybe like adjust the angles just a little, but I wouldn't necessarily want to do it massively on a big scale. I just don't think it's worth it. This is more for just taking stylistic shots for your own enjoyment, or for perhaps Instagram posts, Facebook posts, Twitter posts, whatever that may be. But yeah, overall I'm quite happy about some of these changes. The camera upgrades have come a long way. You know, we've got all the settings now for daytime, for rain, which the rain does now show up. That is now fixed. We have like cloudy, foggy weather. Yeah, this is foggy. Then we have kind of like a cloudy option. Then we have a kind of thunderstorming option, which actually I'm a little bit gutted about this, because now we've got the thunderstorm, but now we've got all this heavy rain. Like I was using the thunder in my mythological snap, and I would just never use this. And then we've got kind of like the nighttime and things like that if you wanted to do a nighttime kind of shot. So it is nice that we've got those options now. Obviously we've still got the same filters that we used to have before, which you can use these filters and then use in conjunction with things like this, where you can turn up or turn down saturations or focus, or, you know, change time of days and stuff like that. We do still have the same frames, no additional frames just yet, but hopefully soon we'll get a couple more. And then we do have the usual settings here, so you can turn your touch of magic off, you can turn snippets off, you can turn speech bubbles off, so if someone talks in your snap, just click that button and it will remove it. You can turn your avatar visible or invisible. Your hangout, so that's if someone's buddied up with you, one of the villagers, so you can turn that off and on. Villagers visible will just turn off generic villagers that are kind of floating around in the background, not hanging out with you. Critter visible is the generic village critters. So if you're in the meadow and you don't want one of the bunnies that runs around in your image, you could turn that off. And then companion visible is for equipped companions, so ones you're actually hanging out with. And then the visual effects activate. There's no point me doing this now because there's nothing to show, but that will set off things like fireworks, the pyrotechnic flames that you could get from the rock show star path and things like that. That would set those off so that they run. That's what that feature does. But yeah, that's pretty much most of the adjustments to the camera mode, both from the Alice update and this one. So I hope that does help you a bit more with sort of exploring these settings. As I said, you can now sit in camera mode, and as I said, the different kind of seats will adjust the kind of poses you get. So I know there's a couple that have a slightly different pose, like I think this one is slightly different. So if I come on here, you see it said lounge, and then she kind of scrolls through her phone. It is a bit broken for me. She kind of has her phone in the wrong place. I don't know if that's broken for anyone else, but for me it is. She kind of doesn't do the right look. But yeah, depending on whether it says lounge or sit. So you see when I approach this, it says lounge. When I approach this, it says sit. They do have slightly different looks. But yeah, that is the main camera mode features and upgrades and updates. I don't really know what to call this, but yeah, I hope that helps. I really do hope it helps. Don't be scared to test out things. Don't be scared to try and experiment and things like that. If you turn something on, you can just turn it back off again. You can turn it up, you can turn it off. Just have a play around and see what you can come up with. Enjoy messing around with the features and stuff like that. It is quite fun to do. So I hope this makes you feel a bit more braver in terms of photo mode. Also, I will just briefly go over as well. Of course, in terms of the photo poses, you have your selfie mode, you have your base mode here, which is kind of like a standard pose, viewpoint, whatever you want to call it. You can spin the camera around and your avatar will usually look towards the camera till you get to a point where you're too far behind for a neck to reach. And then we have the third camera mode, which you can use to zoom out, get those zoomed out shots. Not that I particularly like those. You can also zoom in, so scroll to zoom in if you want a close-up of your avatar or character, if you did want that at all, or you want to zoom in on certain decor, you can use this. Now, unfortunately, this free camera mode is a bit tied to your avatar. It can only go so far. But yeah, that is one of the modes you can use to kind of get some unique camera perspectives and viewpoints should you need to. Then there is the seat impose camera mode where you can spin around your character. You can kind of go up and down just slightly if you want to. You can kind of spin around and things like that. That is one of the options that you can have when you go into the photo mode and things like that, so you are quite limited. Or there is also the free camera mode where you can zoom out, you can zoom in, so you can get close-up shots if you wanted to. That is the other option with that. So there is no selfie mode when you are seated, just in case you were curious how the camera mode functions in those kind of like seated options and positions. And then the other thing that I will just briefly touch on before we wrap up, just in case anyone is curious, there are ways to get kind of like zoomed in shots without being zoomed in. Let me pull out a couple of the items. So if you've ever been curious how people have got those zoomed in shots where it's kind of close to the character but not in the free camera mode, it's using certain items. Oh, I wonder if I do the focus. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Wait, that's actually really good. Okay, so if I come into free camera mode here, you see, because I'm close to the car, it kind of puts me out of focus. If I toggle the focus, I'm in focus. So you can get those really zoomed in camera shots now. Oh, that is definitely very good. Okay, that is definitely good. That is definitely worthwhile. So yeah, if you want a really close-up shot, there's a few items you can use. There is the Oswald's car if you have the Rift in Time DLC. There is the castle wall if you have the castle wall kit. You can use that to get that close-up shot. If you don't have that, the base item you can use is the rocks from the foliage. That is another item you can use. You can also use the Vizier's table. Again, that's a DLC item That is a Rift in Time item. I believe you have to level up Jafar. And then there is also another item that I didn't bring out, which is the Stitch car. There's a giant fruit car that you get in the Stitch bundle, and that can be used for getting these close-up shots as well, just in case you were intrigued. And as I said, if you get a bit too close with these new settings, you can adjust the aperture, or you can adjust the focus a bit if you do want to get a bit more. Well, no, it'll be aperture. You have to adjust the aperture. If you adjust the aperture, you can put yourself into focus there, should you want to add a bit more focus to your character. But it does allow you to get these close-up, zoomed-in shots, which is quite nice. Anyway, I think that's a full breakdown of the camera, hopefully now. I know I've kind of tried to wrap up this video about 3 times now and keep getting distracted showing you something new. But yeah. Hopefully you found that helpful and informative. If you did, don't forget to give it a like. If you have any set questions, feel free to leave them down below and I will do my best to answer them. I can't promise that I know everything, but I will do my best to help out as much as I can. Or feel free to join my Discord and you can also ask me there. Anyway, have fun with the camera mode, have fun with the new settings. I hope you do enjoy it. Do take care of yourselves and I'll be sure to see you all in the next one. Bye guys! A huge shout out to our super top members, Spread Lake and Caroline Rose. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. It means so much to me and I appreciate you spending the extra to become a super top. Thank you so much.